IGN put out an article that basically stated the blockbuster games bubble has burst. I think they're right. They may not like it, but I know a lot of gamers who are happy with it because of what a lot of the AAA game studios have been doing with their video games, the stuff they've been putting in their video game. And IGN couldn't have picked two better games to show on their little Twitter picture here that illustrates this fact perfectly. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League and Concord. Those two games are flops. There are specific reasons as to why they flopped. Just they were bad games, they approached it wrong, the character designs were ugly, DEI, ESG, I mean, there's a lot of things you can wrap up into that pie as to why these games fail. And that's part of the problem with why the AAA gaming industry right now is kind of bursting, because they don't know how to make good games anymore. Everything is DEI, ESG, women have to be ugly, we have to, down with the patriarchy, we have to preach to you, you have to make sure you get the correct pronouns, and if you don't, you got to do a barf. All of these things are reasons as to why the gaming industry is failing right now. So overall on IGN, the video game industry is currently in the thralls of a paradox. For players, it could be argued we're in one of the greatest times for gaming, which we are. There's incredible breadth of choice across consoles, handhelds, and PCs made ever more accessible through gaming subscription services like Xbox Game Pass and PlayStation Plus. But from an industry perspective, things could not be more dire. I don't really care from an industry perspective. Who gives a fuck about the industry perspective? I don't, because their perspective fucking sucks right now. We see what they're pushing in games. Dragon Age Veilguard is another prime example of this. More and more studios seem to be closing. Good, because look, it's simple. Put out good games, you succeed. Put out bad games, you fail, and your studio gets closed. Not listening to fans, bad. Insulting your fans and saying they're the reason games fail, bad. Listening to your fans, giving your fan base what they want, good. You'll be successful. You won't get closed down like these other devs that won't listen to their fan base. It's that simple, guys. It really is. Across the past years, over 23,000 jobs in the video game industry were lost, with a staggering 6,000 in January 2024 alone. I don't care. I mean, I play games. I don't really care who makes the games. I just want the games to be good. And if I don't like the game, or if I don't like what you put in the game, I'm not playing the game. If you lose your job because there's a lot of people like me that choose not to play your game, I don't care. It's not my place to be concerned about whether you have a job or not. Over 30 video game development studios have ceased operations, including Arcane Austin, Volition, and most recently Firewalk Studios. I think Firewalk was Concord, if I'm not mistaken. What's worse, this trend only shows signs of continuing rather than diminishing, because they continue to try and push the same bullshit that people don't want in their games. Some analysts have concluded these closures and redundancies are a necessary remedy to companies having overextended themselves in response to inflated demand in the market during the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, that's true. That is part of the issue. Just 5 years ago, AAA projects' average budget ranged from 50 to 150 million. Today, the minimum average is 200 million. Call of Duty's new benchmark is 300 million. With Activision admitting in the Competition and Market Authority's report on the AAA development that it now takes the efforts of 1.5 studios just to complete the annual Call of Duty title. So obviously I am not a developer, but I would imagine at some point in time, the more and more you put into graphics, eventually you're going to run into an issue where your return isn't worth the investment. There will be a roadblock or a wall that you're going to hit with graphics. You can only make them so good to the point where they are too expensive to do. And I think that's the point we've kind of run into with this. I think that is a huge issue as to why some of these games have just skyrocketed in price. And then you probably also have a bloated budget because you have way too many people working at these companies that you don't need working there. And while I hate to admit it, I do think game prices play a role in some of this. They've stayed relatively static for a long time, much longer than most other things in the economy, like milk, eggs, just anything. Inflation impacts a lot of things, but gaming prices don't really seem to do that. Now, there are some games that have increased their prices to $70, or some games will do like $90 to $100 because they'll offer you like DLC and whatnot, but $60 is kind of the general price tag still for games. So the cost of doing business has went up, but the price that they charge for these video games hasn't really. But I do think keeping it around $60 is probably unrealistic. It needs to probably go up to at least $70. In the same CMA report, an anonymous publisher admits that development costs for one of its franchises reached $660 million, with $550 million in marketing costs on top. That is a $1.2 billion game. Holy, what is that game? Holy shit. Is it Assassin's Creed Shadows? I mean, I would be surprised, but holy shit, that's expensive. To put that into perspective, Minecraft, the world's best-selling video game of all time, has of last year only achieved $3 billion. It took 12 years to reach that figure, having launched in 2011. Holy shit. Look, that is not, you can't do that. You cannot continue to have games cost that much and then have that. I mean, your marketing costs alone in this example was almost as much as the game. Holy shit. There's no way you're making your money back on. Holy cow. Black Myth Wukong reportedly cost around $43 million to make. And this is a $60 action RPG, and it has sold over 20 million copies. So let's look at it. $60 times 20 million, $1.2 billion. Now, obviously, they're not pulling all of that. I would imagine there's other costs. And I don't know how this works with games like it does with movies, because movies, you get theaters, they take a cut. And then the marketing is rolled into everything as well. I don't know if that's included in the $43 million or if marketing is on top of the 43. But either way, 20 million copies. They got 1.2 billion. So look, it's possible to keep your game costs down and have an incredible game. This game was a beautiful game, well worth the $60. And it was only $43 million to make. This is the problem right here with AAA. This is why they are failing. Well, one of the reasons why they're failing. The other reasons is they are turning their player base off by inserting all this DEI, ESG crap into the game, and then they turn around and have fights online with the gaming community. They will insult you. They will blame you if their game fails, and that's not a way to win your customer over. Do you think I would want to buy your game if you're going to turn around and call me a white supremacist or an incel or a grifter or something? No, who would? Don't insult me, expect me to buy your game. They're going to try to blame all of the failures and these studio closures on the cost, essentially, of how expensive it is to make these games. That's what they're going to try to do. That's what this article seems to the direction it seems to kind of be going. Now, I don't think that's completely true. If you make a good game, people will play it. I mean, Black Myth Wukong is a prime example of that, right? Stellar Blade is a prime example of it. Part of the problem, I feel, with some games, if they have limited success, is which platform are they released on? Are they released on multiple platforms? Are they only released on the PS5, for example? That's part of the problem as well. Like Stellar Blade, I firmly believe it would have done Wukong numbers. Okay, maybe not quite, but it would have done a lot more than it did. And it still was very successful on the PS5 alone. But if it was released on PC at the same time, oh hell, it would. PC gaming is huge. If you don't release your game on a PC at the same time you release it on a console, I think you're making a mistake. I think you're severely cutting into how successful your game will be, right? But if you don't make a good game, people aren't going to buy it. Doesn't matter how many platforms you sell it on. All we got to do is look at Concord. Look at Concord. Now, obviously, we're not talking about players right now, right? Because this game is shut down. But it's shut down for a reason. Look at the all-time peak 3 months ago. They had an open beta, free. You didn't have to pay the $40. And they still couldn't get people to play the game. So what did they do? Oh, well, they blamed the $40. Everybody I saw online that was a games journalist blamed the $40 price tag. I'm like, look, if the game was successful, people would buy it. Black Myth Wukong is a prime example of this. $60, people had no problem buying that game. Stellar Blade, people had no problem buying that game. They had a free open beta, and they couldn't get people in there to play their game. That's why Concord fell. Horrible game, probably wasn't needed because, it tried to fit into a genre, honestly, that's probably already filled perfectly with Overwatch and some of these other shooters. I don't play that genre, so I don't know all the games that exist. Then you get the Suicide Squad. Granted, they had a higher peak than Concord, but $13,000 for an online live service game that involves the Suicide Squad? Look at it now. 138 right now, 142, 24-hour repeat. Let's go back 6 months. Maybe 500, 6 months. 665 looks like it was the highest over the last 6 months. That's no way to have a successful game. I can't believe that that's enough people playing to keep your servers running. Because this is a live service game. You're constantly accumulating cost. It's not like you just printed a disc or a download and people download it or buy it once and you don't have to maintain anything on the back end. I mean, this is a live service game. They're gonna have racks that have servers that house this game. There's no way this is enough to keep that game going. Bad games in general will fail. If you have a mediocre game, it might succeed if it's at least trying to be decent. But you put the DEI ESG stuff in it, it's gonna fail. Look, people don't want to give the DEI ESG stuff the proper respect that it honestly deserves as far as how impactful it is in the game's failure. I don't think initially it was as huge, but the more and more they've pushed this, the more and more they come out and call your player base bigots, incels, and they insult anybody who might question certain things. And they've built an environment where anytime you see a black person or a woman of color in a video game, you can't help but wonder, why are they there? It's the same thing you have to think about when you think about our current vice president. People may not want to admit it, but Joe Biden stated clear as day, you can find this on the internet, he picked her purely because she was a black woman. So you have to question, why is she really there? Because she was a black woman. Not because she was qualified, not because she deserved it, because her top defining characteristic was that she was a black woman. He said that before he picked her, he was going to pick a black woman as his VP, and he did. When you have video games that take that same type of sentiment and put it front and center and make that your priority, your game's going to be bad. Your game's going to be mediocre. And even if your game has a chance to be good, it has now gotten to the point in society where it's starting to turn people off. They will not give your game a chance. This is part of the issue. Costs play a big role into it, but I am a firm believer that DEI and ESG also play a big role into it. The reality of these budgets mean entire publishing houses are massively overstretched and are now desperately facing the consequences. If their developers' huge projects don't make money immediately, they must die. Well, if they're live service games, yes. It costs money to maintain a live service game. If it's not going to have a huge impact immediately, yeah, it needs to die. It's not going to just slowly trickle along and then all of a sudden 6 months down the road explode. That's not the way the gaming industry works. Usually, it explodes at the beginning, and then it trickles down. And for a live service game, you want to have enough content and a good enough gameplay to keep that trickle down to a minimum so that you come to some sort of consistency, right? You'll have downs, you'll have ups, whenever you get stale content or whenever you release new, fresh content, but you want it to be consistent, right? You don't want it to just go down. That's part of the problem the First Descendants have it. Look, I love the First Descendant, but when you look at the Steam charts, let's look at it for the last 3 months. Look at it. This is part of the problem the First Descendants having. It's a fun game. Really good. Asmongold's played on Steam. He seemed to really like it. I played with my wife. I really like it. As good as the game is, they've struggled to keep fresh content that keeps players around. It's not that difficult to understand. You can only live off of skins and your current content for so long. Now, I have no doubt that they've probably made their money back because of how expensive the skins are and how popular the skins are. But eventually this game will die unless they start pumping out content to bring players back in. They had a pretty good peak, 260,000, but right now 9,000 and 13,000 24-hour peak. They're struggling. If they don't turn it around, they will die too. Blizzard's survival project Odyssey had a similar trajectory. Odyssey would have been the studio's first new IP in 8 years, and given the market's love for games like Minecraft and Rust, such a gaming titan should have undoubtedly made waves with this project. When Microsoft acquired Activision Blizzard, the project was swiftly killed with little reason publicly given beyond inconveniences in switching engines to increase player count on the servers. Blizzard in the old days, I would have trusted them with a game like this. But not today. Hell no, not today. It's not the same Blizzard, right? Their priorities are completely different. I mean, you just look at current day WoW. I can't even play the game. These examples of the current AAA publishing call reflect a deep-rooted fear to engage with any new and original, with publishers perhaps more risk-averse than ever to stray out of their established IP safety bars. Well, to be fair, that's not an issue unique to the gaming industry. Hollywood's the same way. Remake after remake. Maybe it's the fact that a newer generation is at the helm of a lot of these projects now. And I question whether that newer generation has the right priorities in their head to be able to tell well thought out, complex stories in games and movies. I don't think they can. I don't know what to do to fix it other than making sure we weed out some of the absurd, insane craziness that's going on in society right now. And a lot of these new people in these positions that are making decisions, that are writing these stories in the gaming industry or in Hollywood in general, these are activists that care solely only about certain things. And I don't think they can do anything outside of that. I don't think they really can. So you have to weed them out. You have to bring in people who actually care about the story they're writing, care about the IP they're trying to nurture and grow, and not care first and foremost about preaching to people about their pronouns or gender identity or sexual orientation or political stuff. I mean, you got to get rid of people like that. But even well-known IP that could be worth millions in sales and revenue is being left to rot, despite owning infamous Jak and Daxter, Killzone, Resistance, and Sly Cooper to name a few entries in PlayStation's sprawling dormant library. Sony's CFO recently claimed the company lacks enough original IP to consolidate itself as a true gaming powerhouse. If you're a fan of those IPs, you're probably praying that they do nothing with them. Because again, the problem that exists today, like I stated just 30 seconds ago, I wouldn't want those people touching any IP that I loved and held dear. I love Stargate SG-1, for example. I love Stargate Atlantis. I hated Stargate Universe. Honestly, I thought the concept was cool, but I didn't like the execution of it. But people have been clamoring for more Stargate. I'm like, look, unless you're bringing back the people who wrote and directed and produced SG-1 and Stargate Atlantis, and you kept a similar format, I don't want you to touch it. I don't trust them to make it and keep the original spirit intact. I really don't. They're gonna have requirements on who and what they have in this show, and I don't want to deal with that. I'd rather put the story first and not worry about the gender and skin color of the people on the show, and making sure that we talk about the right certain important topics. And look, I just don't trust them to make the show. I'd rather them leave it alone and not run it into the dirt like Disney has with Star Wars. What Totoki may mean is that Sony's older catalog of library IP does not fit the mold of what every publisher has been mindlessly chasing for the better part of the decade. The next big live service money print. Gamers only have so much money to go around. So, I mean, you can't continue to bleed them dry. Eventually, they're not going to have enough money for your game or enough money for this other person's game because they're putting all their money into this other game. So they can't do it all, right? Look, it's great. I understand everybody wants to make money, but too much of a good thing is still too much. But live service titles require investment of not only money, but time to find their audience, neither of which was afforded to Firewalk Studios' Concord. Well, to be fair, they didn't make a splash. That came out and it just floated. It didn't splash. It didn't bring people in. Look, you can't expect to give a game time when you had nobody playing it. If you have nobody playing it when it's released, you have nobody playing it when it's an open beta and it's free, you're not going to have anybody playing the game. It didn't pull people in. That trailer was horrible. It didn't make me want to play the game at all. Not to mention the character designs were just atrocious. I mean, we could all see what was going on behind the scenes when you design those characters. We're not dumb. Gamers are beginning to wane interest in these monolithic projects. You need only to look at the top-rated games of 2024. Whereas 2023 awards lists were littered with AAA titles from 500-strong studios, 2024 show a revitalized hunger for a smaller, more independent spirit. Why do you think people are preferring smaller, more independent studios, more independent games? It's not because the games are cheaper. The games are better. The games aren't filled with all this DIESG crap. Now, usually what happens is these smaller studios will come out with a successful game, and I'm worried that Shift Up will have this problem after Stellar Blade. But once they have that initial success, you'll have a larger company like Sony. They'll partner with these companies. They'll work with them, and they'll slowly, these smaller companies will slowly get infected by the curse, the disease at Sony, for example. And eventually, Sony consumes like the board, and brings in this smaller company into Sony. And guess what? There is no smaller company anymore. It's Sony. So any original idea, any good game this smaller company could have done, gone. Because Sony worships at the altar of DEI and ESG. It's like the Democrats right now. They lost the election, and the first thing they do is they blame the voters. They call them racist. They call them bigots. They call them incel. They don't take the time to see, okay, why did we lose? What did we do wrong? No, it's never their fault. It's the voters. The same way with Sony and these video game companies. It's never themselves. It's the fans. It's the customer. The customers are the bigots. We're not the bad guys. They are. It's always the same thing. They can never understand why, because again, there's a lot of money in this DI and ESG, which is why a lot of these companies worship at that altar. Not because they believe it. The activists that work inside that company, sure. The higher ups that choose to follow that path, not initially. Maybe now, as the activists slowly move up, there's a lot of money in it. They get investment money, and that's all they want. Arcade Machine Throwback UFO 50, the Metrovania-esque Animal Well, Poker Roguelite, Balatro, the text-based pixel art adventure, the Crimson Diamond, are just some of the games you'll see appearing again and again on these lists. Despite their numerous differences, they share a commonality, a smaller, more refined experience that recalls earlier eras of gaming where marriages of mechanics and storytelling were key through technological craftiness rather than literal countryside game worlds. I will admit, I'm really getting tired of open world games. Really am. That's what I liked about Wukong. Kind of blended the both linear and open world together. You knew where to go. You weren't going to get lost and just get sidetracked so much that you never would complete the game before you lost interest, right? Looking at you, Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom. The nostalgia they create for older video game generations are central to the heart of their creation. Oh, wait, IGN, wait. You might have just stumbled across something. Nostalgia created for older video game generations are central to the heart of their creation. So what you're saying is they're doing something that gets a reaction out of the fans. The fans want this. The fans enjoy this. Why aren't the AAA devs doing something that fans want as well? Maybe that's part of the problem. They spend all these years, all this money on making a game that nobody wants. They create nostalgia for older video game generation. And I love that. Make me feel like a kid again. That's what games are for. To lose yourself into the game, to be immersed into that fantasy world or whatever world the game's creating for you. Not to be preached to, not to be talked down to, not to be treated like a bigot because your worldview differs from the worldview of the people who created the game. That's why Power World was so successful. Power World was awesome. It did something that Pokemon hasn't done in a long time. It was fresh. It was new, but it was fun. You could live in that world and just enjoy yourself. And it was simple. Yeah, the graphics were mid. I mean, barely. The gameplay was good. You could have fun. Play with other people. Shoot guns. You didn't have any preaching. Didn't have any pronouns. Didn't have any DI or ESG. Just a fun game. You could lose yourself in for a few hours. You get up and get back to life. You had nothing reminding you of all the crap you're having to deal with during your day. Same thing with Black Myth Wukong. Different style game. Definitely a lot more expensive to make. Graphics were a lot better. The gameplay was fun. The style was good. Mechanics were good. When you got into that game, you were so immersed. I spent 8 hours on a stream playing all of the last part of chapter 4 and all of chapter 5. I've never streamed that long. Time just flew by. It was fun. And that's what games are missing nowadays. A lot of these games are missing the fun. You guys are so caught up into making money and to preaching to the fan base, and then you turn around and insult them when they dare criticize you. You guys need to get off your high horse and start making games by gamers, not games by activists and people who want to make money. You think the people who originally made the Blizzard games, World of Warcraft, or not World of Warcraft, but Warcraft, you think they were doing it just because they only wanted to make money? No, they were passionate. That's why they did such a tremendous job with those games. They were passionate about the game they were making, about the idea that they had. You guys are missing that. The last part of this sentence, I touched on this as well, and inadvertently, without realizing the sentence also mentioned this. The nostalgia they create for old video game generations are central to the heart of their creation. They just want you to pick them up and have a good time now and again. Yes, perfect, IGN. That was a perfect sentence. I can't tell you how perfect that sentence was. The slow but increasingly clear pivot of video game audiences to a potential indie game renaissance is a clear message to publishers that if everything is bigger and bolder, who possibly has the time to play more than 1 or 2 games each year? Okay, that's a valid point. Take Elden Ring, for example. That game is so huge. Unless you're a streamer and you play 8 to 12 hours a day, it's going to take just your casual gamer a long time to go through that game, which to me, honestly, I'm fine with. I'm okay with. That's cool. But if you're playing that game and you want to beat it, then it's going to take a while. It's going to take even longer if you play other games, right? I mean, I do think the size and scale of a game can be a detriment. Not always. If your game is good enough, I think that'll be overlooked. I really do. But that is something to keep in mind. It just could be that I've changed as a gamer and I kind of don't like the huge open world anymore because I have FOMO. I can't help but look behind every nook and cranny. And you know what? When I'm like that, it's going to take me a long time to get from point A to point B. And so if the game doesn't have anything built into it that helps me get from point A to point B faster, I lose interest. It feels like the top end of the video game industry is currently faced with two paths to choose from. The first is the status quo. It can continue to engorge on bigger budgets with impossibly open yet incredibly empty worlds filled with 80 plus hours of content. I'm really glad somebody's seeing some of this. That has about 10 hours of meaning to its players, or hopelessly pursue the live service train which left the station over 5 years ago, with late passengers wondering why the money isn't rolling anymore. Woo, got going. How you doing? Yeah. These billion-dollar gambles could pay off, but it's becoming less and less likely. Or they could opt out for the second path, a wider breadth of projects, smaller in scope and scale with a refined focus on gameplay mechanics, and perhaps a return to older styles of video games long dormant. Look, now we don't need to go back to the 90s and early 2000s where you have like your Nintendo 64, Super NES, your PS1 graphics. I mean, I like the newer fidelity, right? Obviously everybody does, but if realism is going to give me all these ugly females, fuck it, I don't want it. Give me those busty, sexy females from the 90s and early 2000s. That's what I want. I want to return to games that are fun, games that have fantasy in them, games that know who their audience is and they appeal to their audience, like Stellar Blade's doing. Look, if you're Dragon Age Veilguard, honestly, if that's the game they wanted to make, I have no problem with that. Just understand that you're going to get the player base that wants that. And if that player base isn't big enough for you to maintain the game, well, you're going to fail. If you're in the business of making money when you make video games, the smart choice, honestly, is to make video games that appeal to a large number of people and not piss a large number of people off. Read the room a little bit. That's what you guys should really start doing. Read the room. Stop being so expensive. Stop worshiping at the altar of DEI, ESG, and make games for gamers. You can have little niche games. I don't have a problem with that, but you got to keep the game costs down. You can't make a $200 million game that's for a niche audience like Dragon Age Veilguard. You just can't do it. $43 million to make Black Myth Wukong, and it made $1.2 billion. Kept the cost down. They made, honestly, I think they made a niche game. I really do. But people love a lot of the Chinese history because they love that story of Journey to the West. Not to mention the style of the game. The combat is very Souls-like. People love that stuff. And I really love this line here. Maybe studios can remember that we used to play video games because they were fun, not because of their bigger than last year maps carpeted by denser, higher resolution grass that you walk across to finish another piece of side content that pushes you one digit closer to 100% completion. That's perfect. I mean, that sums it up right there. Remember that we used to play video games that were fun. That is a huge issue nowadays. They don't make them for fun. Hey, you know, I don't agree that money is the only thing, but I'm surprised. This was a good article by IGN, guys. I'll post it down in the description if you wanted to go through and read it. But what do you guys think? What do you think is happening in the game industry that is causing this bubble to burst? Like the video if you did. Subscribe to the channel for more content, and I will talk to you guys next time. Have a good day.